A frail widow and her tiny puppy were publicly destroyed when a billionaire's son dumped ice-cold blue soda over her gray hair for a viral video. He laughed in her face, called her a broke old hag who should have stayed in whatever nursing home she crawled out of. His friends surrounded her like a pack of wolves, phones raised, howling with laughter as the bright blue liquid dripped down her simple patterned dress and pooled at her feet. She clutched her frightened German Shepherd puppy to her chest while strangers filmed her humiliation. Not one person stepped forward to help. But Preston Vance made a fatal mistake. He didn't know that Henrietta Velezzi's son isn't just some businessman in a nice suit. Lorenzo Velezzi is the head of the most feared crime family on the eastern seaboard. A man whose name makes federal prosecutors suddenly lose evidence. A man whose enemies check into hotels and never check out. He owns judges. He controls unions. He has made billionaires kneel and beg for mercy. And Lorenzo was already inside the mall, walking toward his mother for their weekly lunch, flanked by 4 men who have buried problems bigger than Preston Vance. When Lorenzo stepped into the atrium and saw his mother standing there, drenched and shaking, surrounded by laughing hyenas in designer clothes, he didn't scream. He didn't run. He stopped dead still. He removed his sunglasses. Handed them to his nearest man. And he smiled. Not a warm smile. Not even an angry smile. The kind of cold, patient smile that has made powerful men sign over everything they own just to keep breathing. His 4 bodyguards spread out behind him. The crowd began to notice. The laughter started to die. Preston Vance was about to discover that some debts can't be settled with daddy's money. Some debts are paid in ways that money can't fix. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of a small third-floor apartment on Taylor Street in Chicago's Little Italy, casting delicate patterns across worn hardwood floors that had been swept clean 1,000 times over 40 years. The smell of fresh espresso drifted from a tiny stovetop pot, mixing with the familiar scent of lavender sachets tucked into every drawer and closet. Henrietta Velezzi, Etta to everyone who knew her, stood at her kitchen counter in a faded housecoat, her gray hair pinned back in a simple bun. At 68 years old, her hands still moved with the precision of the seamstress she had been for 4 decades. Those hands had stitched wedding dresses and communion gowns for half the families in the neighborhood. Now they carefully measured kibble into a small ceramic bowl painted with sunflowers. At her feet, Dante waited with the patient excitement only a puppy can manage. The tiny German Shepherd was just 4 months old, his ears still too big for his head, his paws promising the large dog he would someday become. Etta had found him shivering in a box behind the church 2 months ago, and despite her son's offers to buy her any purebred dog she wanted, she had refused. Dante had chosen her. That was enough. She set the bowl down and watched him eat, her coffee growing cold in her hands as a familiar ache settled in her chest. 10 years since Enzo passed. 10 years of quiet mornings alone in this apartment where they had raised their only son. Lorenzo had begged her to move somewhere bigger, somewhere safer, somewhere with a doorman and an elevator. He could afford palaces now, her boy. But Etta wanted none of it. This was her home. These walls held her memories. The small kitchen where Enzo taught Lorenzo to make Sunday gravy. The bedroom where she had sewn until her fingers bled to keep her family fed during the lean years. The fire escape where she still grew tomatoes and basil in rusted coffee cans every summer. She moved to the bedroom and opened her closet, pulling out her best dress, a simple pattern thing in soft blues and creams. She had made it herself 15 years ago. It was not fashionable. It was not expensive. But she pressed it carefully with her old iron, smoothing every crease with the same attention she once gave to silk wedding gowns. Today was important. From beneath her mattress, Etta retrieved a worn envelope. Inside was $347, every penny saved from her small pension over the past year. Lorenzo's birthday was next week, and she intended to buy him something special. Something purchased with her own money, earned through her own sacrifice. He could buy himself anything in the world, her son. But he could not buy a gift from his mother's heart. Dante finished eating and trotted over, pressing his warm body against her ankle. Etta smiled down at him. They had a big day ahead. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving Etta standing before the towering glass entrance of Monarch Plaza Mall. She had seen the building from a distance many times, its sleek architecture rising above Michigan Avenue like a monument to wealth she could never comprehend. But she had never stepped inside. Places like this were not built for women like her. Dante shifted in her arms, his small body warm against her chest. She had tucked him into her large canvas purse with his head peeking out, hoping no one would notice. The mall had rules about pets, she was sure, but she could not leave him alone in the apartment all day. He was too young. Too small. He needed her. She pushed through the revolving door and the world changed instantly. The air inside was cold and perfumed, carrying the scent of expensive leather and fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases taller than children. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light from chandeliers hanging 3 stories above. Everywhere she looked, she saw wealth displayed without shame. Designer storefronts with clothes that cost more than her yearly pension. Jewelry cases glittering with diamonds. Women in silk dresses and men in tailored suits moving through the space like they owned every inch of it. Because they did. Etta felt the eyes on her immediately. A security guard near the entrance tracked her movement, his hand drifting toward the radio on his belt. 2 women in matching designer sunglasses glanced at her simple patterned dress and then at each other, their lips curling into smirks they did not bother to hide. A man in a cashmere coat stepped deliberately around her as though she carried some disease he might catch. She clutched her canvas purse tighter, feeling the envelope of savings pressed against her hip. $347. A fortune to her. Pocket change to everyone else in this building. Dante let out a small whine, sensing her tension. She stroked his head gently and kept walking. The directory near the fountain told her Rossetti and Sons was on the 2nd floor, East Wing. She had seen the silk tie in their window advertisement in a magazine Lorenzo had left at her apartment months ago. Deep burgundy with subtle silver threading. He had mentioned once, casually, that it was beautiful. He probably forgot he ever said it. But Etta remembered. Mothers always remember. She rode the escalator upward, keeping her eyes fixed ahead while shoppers below pointed at the puppy in her bag and whispered to each other. Let them whisper. Let them stare. She had survived worse than the judgment of strangers. She had buried a husband. She had raised a son alone when the world turned against them. She had stitched her fingers bloody to keep food on the table. These people with their diamonds and designer bags knew nothing of strength. Etta stepped off the escalator and walked toward the boutique with her head held high. She belonged wherever she decided to stand. Preston Vance had never worked a day in his life, and he wore that fact like a badge of honor. At 24 years old, he had already burned through 3 sports cars, 2 engagements, and enough of his father's money to feed a small country for a decade. None of it mattered. There was always more where that came from. He stood near the fountain on the 2nd floor of Monarch Plaza, surrounded by his usual entourage of 4 friends who dressed like him, talked like him, and laughed at everything he said whether it was funny or not. Today he wore a flashy purple blazer over a black designer shirt, his blonde hair styled into a perfect wave that had taken his personal barber 45 minutes to achieve. His smirk was permanent, carved into his face by years of never hearing the word no. Preston's father was Harrison Vance, the billionaire real estate developer whose name was stamped on half the luxury towers in Chicago. That name opened every door, erased every mistake, and silenced every complaint. Preston had learned early that money was not just currency. It was immunity. His phone buzzed with notifications. His latest video, filmed yesterday, had crossed 2 million views. The content was simple. He had walked into a fast food restaurant, ordered a meal, and then dumped it on the cashier's head while his friends filmed her crying. The comments were filled with laughing emojis and fans begging for more. This was his art. This was his legacy. Humiliating people who could not fight back. He was scanning the mall for his next target when he spotted her. An old woman in a cheap pattern dress stood near the entrance of Rossetti & Sons, clutching a canvas purse like it contained her life savings. Her gray hair was pinned back in some ancient style his grandmother might have worn. Her shoes were scuffed and practical. And poking out of her bag was the head of a small dog, some kind of mutt with oversized ears and frightened eyes. Preston felt his smirk widen. This was perfect. An old woman who clearly did not belong here, probably wandered in from some senior center down the block, thinking she could window shop with the real people. She was invisible to everyone else. Easy prey. The kind of target that would generate outrage and engagement and millions of views from people who would watch the video over and over while pretending to be horrified. He snapped his fingers without looking away from her. His friends understood immediately. Marcus pulled out his phone and began recording. Tyler grabbed the bright blue energy drink from Preston's hand and gave it a little shake. Jaden and Cole moved to flank positions, ready to capture every angle. Preston smoothed his purple blazer and started walking toward the old woman with the confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence in his entire life. This was going to be his best content yet. Preston approached with the kind of smile that pretended to be friendly but carried venom underneath. He stopped directly in front of Etta, blocking her path to the boutique entrance, his entourage fanning out around her in a loose circle. She noticed the phones immediately, their dark lenses pointed at her like weapons. "Excuse me, ma'am," Preston said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I think you might be lost. The thrift store is about 6 blocks that way." His friends snickered. Etta looked at the young man calmly, taking in his purple blazer, his styled hair, his eyes that held nothing but cruelty disguised as entertainment. "I am not lost," she replied quietly. "I am shopping for my son." Preston clutched his chest in mock surprise. "Shopping? Here." He gestured at her dress with exaggerated horror. "Did you make that yourself from a tablecloth? I think I saw that same pattern at my grandmother's nursing home. On the curtains." More laughter from the circle. The phones kept recording. Shoppers nearby slowed their steps, watching but not intervening. No one wanted to get involved. Dante growled from inside the canvas bag, his small body trembling against Etta's chest. Preston leaned down to look at the puppy, his nose wrinkling with theatrical disgust. "And what is that supposed to be? That is not a dog. That is a mop with eyes." He straightened up and looked around at his friends. "Somebody call animal control. Or maybe the garbage truck." Etta stroked Dante's head to calm him, her hands steady despite the trembling she felt inside. She had faced cruel people before. She had survived poverty, loss, and grief that would have broken lesser souls. This boy with his expensive clothes and empty heart was nothing compared to what life had already thrown at her. "Young man," she said evenly, "I do not know what happened to you to make you this way. But I will pray for you." The laughter stopped. Preston's smirk flickered, replaced for just a moment by something darker. He was not accustomed to resistance. His targets were supposed to cry, to flee, to give him the reaction his audience craved. This old woman standing before him with quiet dignity in her homemade dress was ruining the content. His ego could not tolerate it. He snatched the bright blue energy drink from Tyler's hand and stepped closer. Etta saw what was coming but did not move. She would not give him the satisfaction of running. "Pray for this," Preston said. He raised the bottle and poured it slowly over her head. The ice-cold blue liquid splashed across her gray hair, streamed down her face, soaked into the dress she had pressed so carefully that morning. Dante barked frantically, pawing at the bag, helpless to protect her. The crowd watched in silence. Not one person moved. Preston stepped back, laughing, already imagining the millions of views. He had no idea those views would cost him everything. The black Escalade pulled into the private parking level beneath Monarch Plaza at exactly 11:45. Lorenzo Velezzi was 15 minutes early for lunch with his mother, just as he had been every Sunday for the past 10 years. Some things were sacred. Some routines could not be broken by business, by enemies, or by the empire he had built from blood and silence. He stepped out of the vehicle before his driver could open the door. Four men in black suits emerged from the second Escalade behind him, falling into formation without a word spoken. They had been with Lorenzo for years. They knew how to move, when to watch, and what happened to people who threatened anything he loved. Lorenzo adjusted the cuffs of his tailored black suit jacket, left open to reveal the white shirt beneath and the intricate tattoos that climbed from his chest to his neck. The ink told stories that only a few men alive could read. Prison years. Blood oaths. Names of enemies who no longer breathed. He wore his history on his skin because he had never been ashamed of what he was. The elevator doors opened onto the second floor, and Lorenzo stepped into the polished marble world of Monarch Plaza. The change was immediate. Shoppers who had been walking with casual arrogance suddenly found reasons to step aside. Conversations lowered to whispers. Security guards who had been lounging near the fountain straightened their postures and looked anywhere except directly at him. Lorenzo did not notice. He never did. Fear was simply the air he breathed, as natural as oxygen. He checked his watch. His mother would be at Rossetti and Sons by now, probably examining the silk ties she thought he did not know she wanted to buy him. He had seen her circling the advertisement in that magazine months ago. She thought she was subtle. She had never been subtle. He loved her for it. Then he heard the laughter. It echoed from the atrium ahead, sharp and cruel and wrong. This was not the polite laughter of shoppers sharing a joke. This was the sound of predators enjoying a kill. Something cold settled in Lorenzo's chest, a sensation he had not felt in years. The last time he felt it, 3 men had disappeared from Chicago permanently. He walked faster. His bodyguards matched his pace without question. The crowd near the fountain had formed a loose circle around something Lorenzo could not yet see. Phones were raised. People were filming instead of helping. The laughter grew louder, led by a young voice filled with the arrogance of someone who had never faced consequences. Lorenzo pushed through the crowd. People parted instantly when they saw who was moving among them. And then he saw her. His mother. Drenched in blue liquid. Trembling. Clutching her frightened puppy while a boy in a purple blazer laughed in her face. Lorenzo stopped breathing. The world went very quiet. Lorenzo did not run. He did not shout. He simply stopped, and the world stopped with him. He removed his sunglasses slowly, folding them with deliberate care before handing them to the nearest of his men without looking. His eyes never left the boy in the purple blazer who was still laughing, still performing for cameras that had already begun to lower. The crowd noticed the 4 massive men in black suits first. Then they noticed the tattoos climbing from Lorenzo's open collar. Then they noticed the absolute stillness of the man at the center, a stillness that radiated danger the way a furnace radiates heat. The laughter died. Marcus, the friend holding the main camera, let his phone drop to his side. Tyler took a step backward without realizing he was moving. The circle of onlookers that had been content to watch an old woman be humiliated suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. Bodies shifted. Eyes looked away. The atrium that had been filled with cruel amusement was now drowning in silence. Lorenzo walked forward. Each step echoed off the marble floors like a countdown. His Italian leather shoes clicked with the rhythm of a man who had never hurried for anyone and never would. He moved through the space Preston's friends had occupied, and they parted before him like water before a ship's bow. None of them spoke. None of them breathed. He stopped inches from Preston Vance. Up close, the boy looked even younger. Softer. His styled blonde hair and flashy purple blazer suddenly seemed pathetic rather than impressive. His smirk had frozen on his face, caught between arrogance and the first flicker of genuine fear. Lorenzo studied him the way a surgeon studies a tumor. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Almost gentle. The voice of a man who had never needed to raise it because everyone already knew what he was capable of. Did you just put your hands on my mother? Preston's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. The smirk attempted a comeback but collapsed halfway. Do you know who my father is? Preston managed, his voice cracking on the last word. Harrison Vance. He owns half this city. You can't. Lorenzo tilted his head slightly, the way a predator examines something small and confused. A faint smile crossed his lips, but it never reached his eyes. Those eyes remained cold and patient and completely empty of mercy. Without breaking eye contact, Lorenzo reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved his phone. He dialed a single number. The call connected immediately. Dominic, Lorenzo said calmly. I need you to contact Harrison Vance. His son just poured a drink over my mother's head. In public. On camera. Pause. Yes. That Harrison Vance. Tell him to come to Monarch Plaza immediately. Tell him to bring his checkbook and his knees. He is going to need both. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Preston had stopped breathing. Mall security arrived within seconds, 3 men in crisp uniforms who had been slow to respond when an old woman was being humiliated but moved with remarkable speed once they recognized who was standing in the atrium. The head of security, a thick-necked man named Patterson, approached Lorenzo with the careful deference of someone who understood exactly which side of history he needed to be on. Mr. Velezzi, he said quietly. How can we assist? Lorenzo did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Preston, who had begun to sweat through his expensive purple blazer. Clear the area, Lorenzo said. And collect every phone that recorded what happened here. Evidence of an assault on an elderly woman. Patterson nodded and began directing his team. The remaining onlookers dispersed quickly, grateful for the excuse to leave. Preston's friends attempted to slip away with them, but 2 of Lorenzo's men blocked their path with nothing more than positioning. Marcus surrendered his phone without protest. Tyler looked like he might vomit. Preston stood alone now, abandoned by his entourage, surrounded by men who answered to someone his father's money could not touch. Lorenzo stepped closer, his voice still soft, almost educational. Let me explain something to you, Preston. Your father builds towers. Impressive ones. But every tower needs permits from the City Planning Commission. 3 of those commissioners owe me favors they can never repay. Every tower needs union labor. I control 4 unions in Chicago. Electricians. Plumbers. Steelworkers. Concrete. He paused, letting the words settle. Every tower needs financing. The banks your father uses have board members who consult me before making large decisions. Do you understand what I am telling you? Preston's face had gone pale. The arrogance that had seemed so permanent was crumbling like wet paper. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know she was. Lorenzo raised a single finger, and Preston fell silent. You didn't care who she was. That is the problem. 47 minutes later, a silver Bentley screeched to a halt outside Monarch Plaza. Harrison Vance, billionaire real estate developer, burst through the doors with the desperate energy of a man who had just learned his entire empire balanced on the edge of a cliff. He found them in a private security office. Etta sat in a chair, a blanket around her shoulders, Dante curled in her lap. Lorenzo stood beside her, silent and patient. Harrison Vance looked at the scene, looked at Lorenzo, and understood everything. Without a word, the billionaire walked to Etta and lowered himself to his knees on the cold tile floor. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Mrs. Veletsy, I am so deeply sorry for what my son did to you. Please. Please forgive him. Forgive me for raising him so poorly." Etta looked down at the kneeling billionaire, then at her son. Lorenzo said nothing. He did not need to. The drive back to Little Italy was silent. Lorenzo kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting gently on his mother's arm. He had sent his men ahead in the Escalades. This moment required no bodyguards, no empire, no fear. Just a son bringing his mother home. Etta stared out the window, watching the gleaming towers of downtown give way to the familiar brick buildings of her neighborhood. The blue stains on her dress had begun to dry, leaving dark patches across the fabric she had pressed so carefully that morning. She had not spoken since they left the mall. Lorenzo parked outside her building and walked her up the 3 flights of stairs, his hand steady on her elbow. Inside the apartment, he guided her to the bedroom door and waited while she changed. He heard the water running in the bathroom. He heard her blow her nose. He heard the soft, muffled sounds of a woman finally allowing herself to cry. He made tea. When she emerged in her old housecoat, her eyes red but her chin held high, Lorenzo was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups waiting. Dante trotted over and pressed himself against her ankles. She sat across from her son and wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. They did not speak for a long time. They did not need to. Over the following days, Lorenzo handled the aftermath with the quiet efficiency that had built his empire. Preston Vance was on a private plane to Switzerland within 48 hours, enrolled in a rehabilitation facility that was really just a luxurious exile. Harrison Vance's flagship development, a 60-story tower on the lakefront, lost its permits indefinitely due to sudden concerns about environmental impact. The banks financing the project discovered unexpected liquidity problems. 3 union contracts were renegotiated with terms that made future Vance developments financially impossible. None of it made the news. None of it ever would. On Wednesday, a delivery arrived at Etta's apartment. Inside the elegant box was a formal letter of apology from Monarch Plaza Management, a designer dress in soft blues and creams that matched the one that had been ruined, and a custom Italian leather collar for Dante. The collar was beautiful, supple brown leather with careful stitching, and attached to it was a small silver crest. The Veletsy family symbol. But it was what happened after the deliveries that mattered most. Lorenzo spent the week in his mother's apartment. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom that had dripped for 3 years. He oiled the squeaky hinge on her bedroom door. He rebuilt the garden box on her balcony so she could plant tomatoes again in the spring. Etta watched him work, saying little, bringing him coffee and sandwiches he did not ask for. For these few days, he was not the boss. He was not the man who made billionaires kneel. He was just Etta's boy. And that was enough. The following Sunday arrived with the kind of golden autumn light that made Chicago feel like a painting. Lorenzo pulled up to his mother's building at exactly noon, stepping out of the black Escalade in a charcoal suit with no tie, his collar open in the relaxed way he only allowed himself on Sundays. Etta emerged from the front door wearing her new dress. The soft blues and creams caught the sunlight, and for a moment Lorenzo saw not the 68-year-old widow but the young bride his father had married in the church down the street. Dante trotted beside her, his new leather collar gleaming, the small silver crest catching the light with each step. Lorenzo offered his arm, and she took it. They walked. This was their tradition, the slow Sunday stroll through Little Italy before lunch at their usual trattoria. Past the bakery where old Mr. Caruso was arranging fresh cannoli in the window. He looked up, saw them, and raised his hand in a wave that carried decades of respect. Past the butcher shop where Etta had bought meat for 40 years. Sal stepped onto the sidewalk to call out a blessing in Italian that made Etta smile. Past the flower stand, the tailor, the small cafe where old men played chess and argued about politics. Everyone waved. Everyone called out greetings. Children playing on the sidewalk pointed at Dante's shiny collar and asked if they could pet him. Etta said yes, and the little ones crowded around while their parents watched from doorways with knowing eyes. No one in the neighborhood knew exactly what had happened at Monarch Plaza. But everyone knew that Etta Velezzi was protected. Everyone knew that her son, despite the whispered rumors about his business, would move heaven and earth and everything in between for the woman on his arm. They reached the trattoria and settled into their usual table by the window. The owner brought red wine without being asked and promised the pasta would be ready soon. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warming the white tablecloth between them. Etta reached across the table and squeezed her son's hand. Her eyes were clear now, no longer haunted by the memory of blue liquid and cruel laughter. "You didn't have to do all that, Lorenzo," she said softly. "I would have been fine." Lorenzo looked at his mother. At the woman who had stitched wedding dresses until her fingers bled to keep him fed. At the woman who had refused his money because her pride meant more than comfort. At the woman who still saw him as her little boy despite everything the world knew he had become. He smiled. Not the cold smile from the mall. Not the smile that made powerful men empty their bank accounts. The warm smile he reserved only for her. "I know, Mama. But nobody touches my mother. Nobody." If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what matters most. May God bless you and your family with strength, protection, and the kind of love that never fades. Type Amen if you believe that family is everything. Please subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible story.